guys, it's Mel. Welcome to my channel. This video is the first of a series of videos that I'm going to do where I'm going to discuss my favourite book. So I have a few different categories for my favourites, and I've picked 10 either books or series to go in the favourite category that I'm talking about. I've tried to put them in order from most favourite to least favourite out of that 10, but of course it depends on what I've most recently read, potentially who I'm talking to, as to where it really does sit. So it's fairly fluid in terms of actual hierarchy, but these are my favourite bunch of books or series. It does sort of include things from when I was about 16 or so, but I haven't included favourite books or favourite series that I really enjoyed when I was younger. This series, it's just going to be very late teens and up. It doesn't necessarily mean that it won't include some middle grades or some young adult books, but it will not include books that I've read as a young adult or a child who was potentially reading middle grade books. With one exception, because I do have the category of favourite picture books, but that is from the point of view of being a teacher and educator, and books that I have discovered over the course of being a teacher and an educator that I love, both for kids, but also that I really enjoy reading to kids. So that's slightly different though. Anyway, what I've decided to do is I'm going to sit here and I'm going to record all of the videos all in one sitting. But I'm going to separate each video into its category, because otherwise we could potentially be here for over an hour, and I don't imagine anyone is going to want to sit and watch a video for over an hour, so I'm going to break it up like that. Before I do get started into the first series, the first video I want to talk about today, I'll tell you what the categories are and then we'll go into it. So we have favourite series, we have favourite standalones, we have favourite picture books, like I said, we have favourite classic, and then I have a video which I'll do at the very end, which is kind of going to be a bit of a weird mix of books, basically that don't fit into the other categories, but that I consider some favourites that I don't want to not talk about, but I'll explain a bit more when we get to that category. This took quite a lot of work because I don't necessarily own all of the books that I've absolutely loved for various reasons, so I had to go onto Goodreads and double check that there wasn't anything I was forgetting when I was looking at my own bookshelves, and then I put them all into lists and tried to put them into some vague order, and as you can see, a lot of crossing out and rearranging happened there. And I've also decided not to hold up the books, because I went to get all the books out and it was just kind of ludicrous, because as you can see, I don't film in front of our actual bookcases. I've explained why in another video, but I'll tell you again. Basically because all of the books are currently in our office, which is where all of Rowling's computer stuff is, which includes a giant server rack, which is basically a cupboard full of computers, and they make quite a lot of noise. So it doesn't make the best environment to film in. So instead I film in the lounge room, which means I have to grab all the books off the shelves and then come and sit down and so on. And with this sheer number of books, it just didn't make any sense to me. It was a huge pile. So I decided that instead I'll just put the screenshot somewhere. Alright, so without further ado, let's actually start in on a list. The first one that I'm going to talk about in this video is my favourite series list, and the top billing for that goes to the Elderling series by Robin Hobb. So I've talked about this series quite a lot on my channel because it's my favourite series. It is a high fantasy, epic drama series. It features magic and dragons and adventure and mysterious illnesses and assassins and kings and villains and all of those sorts of things that you would expect from a classic high fantasy. Personally, I think that Robin Hobb paints an absolutely fantastic, beautiful world. I think she puts so much effort and energy into really building rich worlds that really feel real, even though obviously it's in a fantasy setting, so it's another world setting. It feels very real and it's like somewhere that you could potentially actually go and visit. I think that her character work is really fantastic as well. The main characters, so to give you a bit more understanding of how the series works, there are a few different trilogies and one quartet in this series that make up the series as a whole, and each of those series deals with different characters, or we sometimes go backwards to other characters and visit other characters. So I think she paints beautiful characters. Her main characters are always really well rounded, really well written, the kind of characters that are really rich in the sense that they have flaws as well as good points. They make good decisions, they make bad decisions, they do terrible things, they do good things, they aren't necessarily always trying to do the right thing, or they have their own sort of set of their own moral compass, so they're trying to do the right thing according to their own moral compass, but that's not necessarily always the right thing for the world, or maybe you can't see how it's the right thing for the world. So they're very rich and well-rounded characters in that regard. They're beautifully written, they're beautifully painted. I really love some of the friendships that she develops in the series. I also love the intricacies of relationships that she writes. So she writes those kind of relationships where, for example, a family member who you love, but maybe you don't get along with, or you have issues with, even though you care about them, or you get along with them for the most part, but there are just some aspects of their personality that you don't mesh with. So she writes those sorts of relationships really well. And yeah, I just think they're a really fantastic example of that high fantasy epic sort of story. So that was the Elderling series by Robin Hobb at #1 spot on my favourite series list. Next up, we take a totally different tack because now I'm going to talk to you about the Mary Russell series, which again is a series that I have discussed at various different points on this channel. So the Mary Russell series is a series of historical mysteries featuring Mary Russell and her partner, the retired Sherlock Holmes. So it is a Sherlock Holmes mystery series, but it is told from the point of view of a young woman called Mary Russell, and I think this series is incredibly clever, incredibly well written, it's incredibly intelligent. It doesn't require you to know anything really about Sherlock Holmes or have any real experience with the Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes, but if you do have experience with those books, I don't feel that that takes away from your enjoyment of the Mary Russell series. They're definitely mysteries, they're not thrillers, and in fact a lot of the mysteries aren't necessarily murder, although there often is murder, there's kidnapping, but there's all sorts of other kinds of mysteries, and sometimes we go into spy networks, so we have espionage type of mysteries. The thing that I like most though is not so much even the mysteries, although they are really well structured and well written. It is mostly her character work. The stories are all told from the point of view of Mary Russell, with some very slight divergences in a couple of the books where we get from Sherlock Holmes's point of view, but for the most part they're told from Mary Russell's perspective, so it's first person narrative, and so you really see into her personality, her version of the world, how she sees things, and you get a sense of where she's coming from, and you really get a sense of place. It's really well written from a historical perspective. You don't feel like it is a modern author trying to write a historical novel. You really feel like you are in that time and in that place, which I think is actually quite difficult to do, so I think she does that incredibly well. And like I said, it's just incredibly intelligent. Mary Russell as a character is incredibly intelligent. She is the partner of Sherlock Holmes, so he chose her as an apprentice because he could appreciate her intelligence, so that tells you a lot if you know anything about Sherlock Holmes. She can also hold her own against his fierce intelligence and his character, which is often quite caustic and quite obnoxious. So she can hold her own against his personality and the strength of his personality, and also against his brother, which again, if you know anything about Sherlock Holmes, you know that Mycroft Holmes is also an incredibly intimidating figure. So she has a real gumption and backbone and intelligence, and it's just amazing. I think this is a really important series from the point of view of feminism, because you have such an incredibly strong female character, and she is an incredibly strong female character who really does go against the norms of the society in which she lived in. The setting is late Victorian era, early 21st century, so there's a lot of constraints on women in that period, and Mary Russell really pushes the boundaries in terms of what she can do and what is expected of her, and I just think that's amazing as well. So yeah, that was my second series, and that was the Mary Russell series by Laurie King. Next up we have the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett. I've talked quite a bit about the Discworld series on this channel also. So for those people who don't know, the Discworld series is a series of books written about a fantasy realm called the Discworld, and it is the Discworld because it is a flat, round disc of a world. The disc sits atop 4 elephants, who then sit atop a giant space turtle called Great Achuan, and Great Achuan is swimming through space, and the disc goes along with Great Achuan and the elephants also. The elephants do have names, I don't remember what they are, but anyway, so as you can tell, it's fantastical. It's got all those crazy magical otherworldly ideas and setting of that you would expect from a classic fantasy. The difference being that Terry Pratchett's work is very satirical, so he uses the fantasy realm of the Discworld, which, as I just said, is totally over the top in terms of its setting, but it's also populated by humans, vampires, trolls, dwarves, elves, witches, wizards, all the sort of things that you would expect from a fantasy world. But Pratchett uses that setting to really talk about our society and talk about humanity and talk about the decisions that we've made and talk about different points in history and talk about different philosophies and technological advances and different artworks, and I mean essentially anything within our society, particularly Western society, but other societies. He does have the counterweight continent, which is supposed to be like a Asian Chinese continent. He has a country that is supposed to represent ancient Egypt. So he talks about all those different aspects of our belief structure and our societal structure from the canvas of a fantasy world. I think they're really clever, really well written. The storylines are always really fun and funny. The characters are really well written, really well realised. If you are a fan of fantasy, if you are a fan of satire, you should definitely read these books. You can pretty much start anywhere as well with the Discworld series. The only 2 books that really come as a pair are the first 2, which is the The Colour of Magic and the Light Fantastic. So they come as a duology, and you really need to read one and then the other. But otherwise, you can pretty much pick up wherever you want. There are series in the overarching Discworld series, but it doesn't really matter if you don't necessarily follow those series. I feel like probably a lot of people watching this were wondering if and when we were going to get to Harry Potter. Well, here we are. Number 4, Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. I don't feel like I need to explain to you anything about Harry Potter. I think most people are aware of Harry Potter and aware of what Harry Potter is about. Even if they haven't read the books or seen the movies, it's pretty hard to escape, so I won't go into any detail. I'll just let you know that coming in at number 4 is Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. Alright, we're halfway through the list. We're up to number 5, and that is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series by Douglas Adams. Going a bit old school now, because these series were published quite some time ago, so I'm not 100% sure if modern readers are particularly aware of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So I'll give you a very brief rundown. They were pretty famous for quite a long time, and they've definitely had an influence on science fiction and satirical authors, but again, quite old books now. So The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was originally a trilogy in 4 parts, if that gives you any idea of the sort of books you're going to be reading. I think there are actually now 6 books. So we start with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Next up is The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. Then we have... I have to look this up. It's been a while since I have read them myself, but we start with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Then we have The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, Life, the Universe and Everything, So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, Mostly Harmless, and then book 6 was actually written by Owen Colfer, and it is And Another Thing. So this series of books is actually a little bit similar to Terry Pratchett in that they are satirical, and he is using this time the canvas of science fiction to talk about our world and our society and the way that we live. It is an actual series, so you start with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and read through, and the main characters are an alien called Ford Prefect and a human earthling called Arthur Dent, and it's sort of about their adventures across the universe. Ford Prefect is a reporter for the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So he was on Earth writing about Earth for the guide, and then Earth got blown up and he and Arthur wound up having to escape and adventure across the universe. And along the way they meet all sorts of crazy characters, they get into all sorts of crazy scrapes, they go and visit the restaurant at the end of the universe, they discover the secret of life. Yeah, it's a wild, crazy ride. It's lots of fun. It's very funny. If you are a fan of science fiction, if you are a fan of satire, I definitely would recommend these books. They are brilliant. And they are number 5 in my top favourite series ever. Coming in at number 6 is The Old Kingdom series by Garth Nix. So the Old Kingdom series it first was a trilogy which was Sabriel, Lyriel and Aborson, and there are 2 other books now as well which are Clariel and Golden Hand. I have actually only read the first 3, and I wouldn't go so far as to say that I don't consider the other 2 books part of the series, but I realised that this was in my top favourite series of all time at the point where there were only 3 books. So at some point I will go ahead and read the other 2. I have heard that they're not as good, but anyway, I'll go ahead and read them. So this series is sort of a portal fantasy, except that instead of going into another world, the characters go into a kingdom that is sort of part of our world. So that kingdom is the Old Kingdom. So in our world we have technology, in the Old Kingdom there is magic. The 2 don't work so if you are a person coming from our world travelling across into the Old Kingdom and taking a gun with you, the gun would stop working. If you are from the Old Kingdom and you come into Earth, up to a certain point there's sort of no man's land in between the 2, and there's a wall that connects the 2. I don't think I'm explaining this very well, but you get the general idea. Anyway, the series starts with Sabriel, who is the main character in the book Sabriel, which is the first book, and Sabriel is a young girl or teenager who is from the Old Kingdom but is being schooled in our world quite near the war, and she is the child of the Aborson, and the Aborson is kind of the necromancer in charge of death, so they guard the gates of death, and Sabriel has to take on her father's role and become the new Aborson. And yeah, that's sort of the setup of the series, and I just think it's really well written. I think that it's a lot of fun. It's young adult, so it's very fast-paced fantasy. I really enjoyed it. I really love the characters. I really love the way that he explores the characters. One of my favourite characters is kind of an ancient evil creature that is forced into the body of a cat, and he is very much what you'd expect from a cat. So he's very sort of snarky and sarcastic and aloof, but a lot of fun. And yeah, I just think they're really, really well written. I really enjoyed them. I've read them a few times now, and I've really enjoyed them every single time I've read them. So that is number 6. For number 7, we are going out of fantasy and we are going into thriller. And this series is the Millennium series by Steig Larsson. So, just like I said with the Old Kingdom series by Garth Nix, there is actually another book. So it was originally a trilogy. There's another book that was written posthumously, so it was actually written by Steig's son, I think. But the first 3 books are the girl with the dragon tattoo, the girl who played with fire, and the girl who kicked the hornet's nest. I just really, really enjoyed this series. I thought that the thriller aspect of it was really well done. There's a great deal of tension in the series. It's incredibly graphic, so I haven't really recommended this as a series to a lot of people because there's a lot of trigger warnings, particularly around sexual assault, particularly in the first book, abuse of children. Yeah, there's just a lot of trigger warnings, but if you can handle that and if you like thrillers, I really would recommend that you read them. I think this is an incredibly intelligent, well-written, well-paced, yeah, just really great series of books. I really, really enjoyed them. It's actually been quite a long time since I've read them, so I think I'm probably due a reread. I don't own them though, so I might have to remedy that. Yeah, so anyway, that was the Millennium series by Steig Larsson. Number 8 is the Kingkiller series by Patrick Rothfuss. So this is a series that I actually read last year. They are my partner Rowan's favourite series, and I had never read them. I finally got around to reading them last year and I absolutely loved them. This is another high fantasy and it features a character called Quoth, and Quoth is telling his story about his life and his learning magic. It is technically classified as grim dark fantasy, so there's a lot of grim dark elements. There's a lot of trigger warnings again, so there's a lot of sort of torture and the characters aren't necessarily treated particularly well, but I think that it's incredibly well written. I think that it's very well paced. I really like the characters. I think the characters are really well written, really believable. Again, like I've said about other series in this list, even though it's set in a fantasy world, you still feel like the characters are very realistic. They're people that you'd potentially know, and even though there's a lot of magic, you feel like the world is really well written and it feels very real. It feels like it's a world that actually could exist and that you could visit. Patrick Rothfuss is a very intentional author. Everything that is in the work is meant to be there, and I think is setting up for a lot of things. So even though this is in a top 10 list of favourite series, I've actually not read the entire series, and that's because, as anyone that is a fan of Patrick Rothfuss would know, he's only written the first 2 books. So there is another book coming, and I think a lot of the stuff that is set up in those first 2 books are going to be explained in the 3rd book. But yeah, I think that it's really well written, incredibly clever, incredibly interesting, and I really enjoyed it. So that was number 8. So coming in at number 9 is The Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. This is another series that I don't feel needs any explanation, because if you haven't read the books or haven't seen the series, then you would have still been unable to escape talk of it. So it is a series of books that was made into the TV show Game of Thrones. It is another epic high fantasy. I think in a similar vein to Robin Hobb. Actually, The Game of Thrones series reminded me, or Song of Ice and Fire, reminded me a lot of Robin Hobb, not because it has the same storyline at all or same characters or anything, it's just something about the way that he writes felt similar to me, but I still preferred Robin Hobb. I haven't necessarily heard that the Song of Ice and Fire is technically grimdark fantasy, but it definitely has elements of grimdark fantasy, so again, there's a lot of trigger warnings for this, for just about everything you could possibly think of. It's very, very graphic. The violence is very graphic. There are a lot of graphic sex scenes. At this point, I have read the series and I have seen the show, and to be honest with you, they're both kind of blending together a little bit. Even though I know the last few books that are out, there's quite a bit of divergence between what was in the books and what is in the series, so I'll be very interested to see where he takes the books. That was Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. Again, I don't feel like I really explained it very well, but I think most of you probably know what it's about, so hopefully that is good enough. And for the number 10 spot, I have gone backwards and forwards even while I was making this video about what series to put at the number 10 spot. So the first sort of 5 or 6 in this list were pretty easy. Then the next lot, as you can see, took a lot of crossing out and rearranging. The last spot I'm still wavering on because I'm not 100% sure whether to put in the Song of Albion trilogy, which was a favourite of mine when I was about 16, 17 and had a huge influence on my life, really, and my reading habits, or whether I should make it the Wheel of Time series, which again had a really big influence on my reading habits. Not so much my life in general, but my reading habits definitely. Or whether to make it the Kate Martinelli series, which is a series written also by Laurie and is another mystery series, only it is set in contemporary, except that it's 1990, so it's not super contemporary, but it would still be classified as contemporary San Francisco, and it is a police drama. So I don't know which of those 3 series to put in at number 10. The Song of Albion trilogy is a portal fantasy. It is an adult portal fantasy and is about 2 characters from Britain who go through a cairn, which is a pile of sort of stones making a grave, go through a cairn into the Celtic otherworld, which is sort of a fantastical version of Celtic Britain. The Wheel of Time series, I think most people probably know, so I won't go into a huge amount of detail about that. And I just told you about Kate Martinelli series. I love all 3 of these series. They all mean something different to me. It's been a while since I read any of them. I feel like maybe I need to do a reread of all 3 series so that I can decide which one becomes number 10. Yeah, so I don't know what number 10 is, but it's one of those 3. Okay guys, so that was the first video of my favourites series that I'm going to be showing you over the next few weeks. So that was the favourite series list. As you can see, it is very fantasy heavy. I am a huge fantasy reader, huge fantasy fan. For a very large portion of my life, fantasy was pretty much all I was reading. That has very much changed now, and I'm reading all sorts of different books, but a lot of these books remain some of my favourite series and favourite books. So there you go. Alright, so thank you so much for watching. Please comment below if you have any comments you'd like to make about any of these books, or you'd like to let me know what your favourite series are. Thank you again so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Tune in for the next favourites video, which is favourite standalones, and I will see you next time.